Hi, Brady here, and we're back to the classroom with a video focusing on something called three-point lighting. Three-point lighting was one of, if not the first techniques that I learned when it came to lighting in cinematography, and I really do think that it is something that you should learn as well, whether it is the first thing you're learning on lighting or wherever you are on your journey of lighting in cinematography. Using three-point lighting is a great way to create dimension in your frame and in your subject, and taking your image from a 2D flat image to something three-dimensional very quick and very easily. But before we dive in, if you find this video or any of the other videos on my channel helpful, please hit that like and subscribe button. Now, it's important to take note of and be mindful of the fact that three-point lighting is far from the only formula or technique that is out there when it comes to lighting. And it's more so just a fantastic starting ground to figure out your lighting and your lighting direction. And it's also a great way to find motivation for your lighting when coming on location. Now, what are these 3 points that are going to make up your three-point lighting setup? Well, it's going to be a combination of 3 different light sources, or sometimes 2.5, which we are going to get to. But they're going to be 3 different light sources, kind of creating a triangle around your subject. And it's going to consist of the key light, the rim light, and the fill or bounce light. So our first point, and also our main light source, is going to be what is called the key light. And this light is going to be in charge of illuminating your subject. It's kind of going to be your brightest main source of light. So in this particular case, I exposed down for the outdoors because it's what I couldn't control. And then it was time to bring in our first light. And as far as light direction goes for this key light, it's helpful to have your light in about a 45-degree light direction. So like I've got my light here, and like how we've got my light in the scene, it's coming from about 45 degrees. And the light source that I used in this particular scene was a Aperture Nova P300C. And I was using the Nova because panels by themselves are already very soft, and going through diffusion, it just makes them one step softer. And for the diffusion that I put my Nova through, I used some half grid, a 4x4 half grid sheet that I just hung over a C-stand. And I want to point out that I got this half grid from a company called LA Rag House based out of California. They don't know that I'm saying this, but I just reached out to them and they were so helpful throughout the entire process. Customer service was fantastic. So again, they don't know I'm doing this. This isn't a paid sponsorship or anything, but I just genuinely appreciated all of their help. So for all of your diffusion needs, feel free to reach out to them. I'm going to put the link down below and let them know that I said hello. Now, the key light was set to 5600 Kelvin just to match up with the daylight outdoors. Now, I want to talk about one thing, and that's budget. If you're over here like, I cannot afford a Nova, why am I here? That's completely okay. If you are working on a budget, just one thing to be mindful of is that your key light should most likely be your brightest light source. So whatever your brightest light that you have in your arsenal is, that should be your key light, just because you're going to be battling through diffusion and wanting to oftentimes overpower a light source like I am with the outdoor daylight. I can't control that, so I needed something bright enough to illuminate my subject still without losing all the detail in the background. So that's our first point, our key light in charge of illuminating your subject. Now, the second point, in no particular order, you're going to have a rim light. Now, your rim light is a great tool for pulling your subject from the background, kind of like what's going on here, and also a great way to create dimension onto your subject. That's really going to be the purpose of this rim light. So as far as the placement goes of your rim light, you're going to typically go cross key. So you've got your key light here, and then the reason being is when that light wraps around the face into the shadows, your rim light's there to distinguish your edge or your rim of your shoulder and your hair and your neckline from the background. So it's going to do a great job of separating you from that backdrop. Its main purpose is creating that separation from your subject and really bringing the attention to your subject. And it's also a great way to add color contrast to your lighting setup, whether you want to use a bicolor light or an RGB light. In my case, I use an Aperture 300X because it is a bicolor light, and I wanted to bring that warmth down to contrast the cool daylight and the cool tones throughout the entire room. So I brought that light to a 3200 Kelvin, and I raised it up on that shadow side just on a C-stand arm swinging over just to stay out of frame, and I threw a Fresnel 2X modifier on that, and the Fresnel was just to focus in the beam on Sarah and only Sarah. I didn't want warm hard light spilling throughout the entire frame. I just wanted to accent that shadow side of her, and again, once more, bring her out and separate her from the background. And one thing with direction to note is that it's helpful to have your rim light coming from a higher direction of your subject. So it just feels unnatural with a rim light coming from a low angle. And also when it's coming from a higher direction, like it is now on me, you're gonna really get that hairline, that neck, and that shoulder line accented with your rim light. So try to keep it as high as you can. You don't want it to be completely overhead, but again, kind of like the key light, how it was 45 degrees, almost like 45 degrees up, just above the hairline and the shoulder line, or just out of frame. Now, the third point doesn't actually have to be a real light source, and oftentimes it isn't a real light source. And in this case, and in many cases, I use it as a fill light, something to just fill in the shadow on that dark side of the face. So your key light points and your fill light points are going to work together as a team, in a sense that your key light is lighting this side of your face, but not making its way around to the shadow side, which is where the fill light comes into play. Any light coming off of that key is going to return back onto my shadow side. So it's a personal preference really of how much or how little return light you want, whether it's your personal preference as the creator or your client's personal request. But to do the best job of controlling your fill light, if it's way too much and too bright, just pull that fill back as far back as you can to your personal taste. But if it's not enough, if it's dark on that shadow side, just bring it in, especially to the point where if you get to your frame light and you're in the frame, you might want to take away your fill and actually bring in another light source, not as strong and as bright as your key light, but something that's going to be brighter than just whatever return is coming back onto your subject. So in my case, for this reflector, I just used a white beadboard, which is like white insulation for houses that I just got at Lowe's, and I cut it to my liking and put gaff tape over the edges so it didn't make a mess. So that's your triangle of a 3-point lighting setup. You've got the key light, and then you've got the rim light, and then you've got your fill light. So let's break down just those three once more and see what it looks like. Now the shot looks great, don't get me wrong, but it's important to remember that we are lighting spaces, not faces. It's something we talk about a lot on this channel. So I noticed that since we exposed down to the windows and then lit our subject, Sarah, everything seemed kind of dark in the rest of the room and in the background. And I just wanted to bring up the contrast ratios and bring up some of the exposure on the wall, on the plant, so on and so forth. So to do that, I took a 300D Mark II, an aperture light, and brought that outdoors with just a reflector that came with it, propped it up to about 50% and splashed it through the window just so it hit on that plant over there in the left corner, made a little bit of shadow on the wall. So now the background isn't just dark and soft. There's actually some level that's in the background and some room tone bouncing around the room. So this is a clear example that the 3-point lighting setup isn't always all you need. Sometimes you need to bring in additional lighting sources to light the rest of your scene. But like I mentioned in the beginning, this 3-point lighting setup is a great starting point to go from. So that about wraps up this week's video. I hope that you found this helpful or any of the other ones on this channel helpful. And if so, please once more hit that like and subscribe button. But I will see you next week and class is dismissed.